The automatic doors of the fitness center opened with a soft whoosh as David stepped inside for the first time. The smell of rubber mats and cleaning products hit him immediately. His palms were already sweating, and not from any workout. Clutched his new gym bag tighter and looked around at the sea of machines' weights. And people who all seemed to know exactly what they were doing. David had been putting this off for months. His doctor's words still echoed in his head from last week's checkup. You need to move more, David. Your body isn't meant to sit at a computer for 12 hours a day. At 28, he felt like he was living in the body of someone much older. His back ached constantly, his energy was low, and simple tasks like carrying groceries up the stairs left him winded. He wore his usual oversized hoodie and loose sweatpants. The clothes hung on his thin frame like curtains on a window. David preferred it this way. The baggy clothing made him feel less exposed, less vulnerable in a world that seemed designed for people who were naturally confident and strong. The fitness center was busier than he expected for a Tuesday evening. People moved between machines with purpose and confidence. Some were lifting weights that looked impossibly heavy. Others were running on treadmills at speeds that made David tired just watching. He felt completely out of place, near the front desk. A woman was checking in members and answering questions. She looked like she could be on the cover of a fitness magazine. Her hair was pulled back in a perfect ponytail, and her workout clothes showed off muscles that David was pretty sure he didn't even have. Her name tag read Lisa, and she had the kind of bright smile that fitness instructors always seem to have. David approached the desk nervously. Hi, I'm new here. I signed up online yesterday. Lisa looked up from her computer and her smile flickered slightly as she took in his appearance. Oh, right. First time at a gym. First time anywhere like this, really. David felt his cheeks getting warm. Why did he just admit that? She probably thought he was completely hopeless. Well, welcome to Fit Life. Here's your key card. She handed him a plastic card without much enthusiasm. Equipment orientation is on Saturdays if you need it. David wanted to ask about the equipment right now, but something in her tone made him hesitate. Thanks, I'll figure it out. He walked away from the desk, feeling even more uncertain. The main workout area stretched out before him like an obstacle course designed by someone who didn't like him very much. Treadmills lined one wall, their belts moving silently as people jogged and walked. The weight section looked especially intimidating. Metal bars and plates that clinked and clanged as serious-looking people lifted them up and down. David decided to start with something that looked safe. He found an empty treadmill and stepped onto it carefully. The control panel had more buttons than his car dashboard. After a few minutes of studying it, he managed to get it started at a walking pace. This wasn't so bad. He could handle walking. 10 minutes later, he was breathing harder than he expected. His legs felt heavy, and there was a stitch forming in his side. He glanced around to see if anyone noticed his struggle. Most people were focused on their own workouts, but he caught Lisa looking in his direction. When their eyes met, she quickly looked away, but not before he saw something that looked like amusement on her face. David tried to ignore it and kept walking. The treadmill belt hummed beneath his feet, and he tried to find a rhythm that didn't leave him gasping. He had always been thin, but he was starting to realize that thin and fit were two very different things. After 20 minutes on the treadmill, David decided to try some of the weight machines. They looked less intimidating than the free weights, where people were lifting barbells that probably weighed more than his laptop bag. He found a machine that looked like it was 4 arms and sat down on the padded seat. The instructions were printed on a small placard, but they might as well have been written in a foreign language. Words like lateral pull-down and proper form swam before his eyes. He adjusted the weight pin to what looked like a reasonable number and grabbed the bar above his head. The first pull was harder than expected. The second one was even worse. By the third attempt, his arms were shaking, and he wasn't sure he could complete the movement. A few people nearby were watching now. David felt his face burning with embarrassment. From across the room, he heard Lisa talking to another trainer. Her voice carried further than she probably intended. Some people think they can just walk in here and become athletes overnight. Look at that guy over there trying to do pull-downs. He can barely move the weight. Her words hit David like a physical blow. He wanted to disappear, to walk out and never come back. But something inside him, maybe stubbornness or maybe just wounded pride, made him finish his set. His form was probably terrible, and the weight was probably too light to matter. But he completed 10 repetitions. David moved through the rest of his workout in a blur of embarrassment and determination. Every exercise was a struggle. His body felt foreign and uncooperative, like he was trying to operate machinery he didn't understand. Push-ups were especially humiliating. He managed 5 before his arms gave out completely, and he had to drop to his knees to catch his breath. Throughout it all, he was aware of Lisa's presence. Sometimes she was helping other members, showing them proper techniques with the kind of patience and encouragement she hadn't offered him. Other times, he caught her glancing his way with what looked like barely concealed laughter, as David finished his workout and headed toward the locker rooms. He overheard Lisa talking to a group of regular members near the water fountain. Guys should see the new guy. Skinny as a rail and about as strong as one, too. He was doing push-ups earlier and looked like he was going to collapse. I give him 2 weeks before he quits. The laughter that followed her comment felt like needles in David's chest. He walked faster, wanting to get away from their voices and their judgment. In the locker room, he sat on a bench and tried to catch his breath. His whole body ached in ways he hadn't expected, and his pride hurt even more. But as he sat there, something interesting happened. Instead of feeling defeated, David felt a spark of anger. Not at Lisa exactly, but at the situation. At his own weakness. At the fact that simple exercises left him exhausted and embarrassed. The anger wasn't destructive, though. It was fuel. David looked at himself in the locker room mirror. His reflection showed a thin, tired-looking man in clothes that were too big for him. But behind his eyes, there was something new. A determination that hadn't been there when he walked in an hour ago. He pulled out his phone and opened his calendar app. Tomorrow was Wednesday. He would come back Wednesday and Thursday. Every day after that, until he was strong enough to do those exercises without shaking, till he could walk on that treadmill without gasping, till Lisa's opinions didn't matter because he knew his own worth. David packed his things slowly, already planning his next workout. He didn't know how long it would take or how hard it would be, but he was going to prove something. Maybe to Lisa, maybe to himself, maybe to both. As he walked out of the fitness center, David felt different than when he'd walked in. Not stronger. Physically, not yet. But something inside him had changed. The journey was going to be difficult, but for the first time in years, he felt ready for a real challenge. 3 weeks had passed since David's first embarrassing day at the gym, and he had kept his promise to himself. Every single day, he walked through those glass doors with the same nervous energy. But now there was something else mixed in with the anxiety, determination. His routine had become predictable. He arrived at exactly 6 in the evening, changed into his loose-fitting workout clothes, and started with 20 minutes on the treadmill. The same treadmill, actually. Number 7 had become his unofficial spot. He could walk faster now without feeling like his lungs were going to burst. Sometimes he even managed a light jog for a minute or two, but David's progress wasn't the kind that turned heads or impressed trainers like Lisa. He was still the thin guy in baggy clothes who struggled with weights that others warmed up with. What people didn't see was the real reason behind his careful, determined approach to fitness. The scars hidden beneath his oversized hoodie told a story that David rarely shared with anyone. 3 years ago, his life had been completely different. He wasn't always the quiet computer programmer who got winded walking upstairs. Before the accident, David had been a paramedic. He was the guy who ran toward danger when everyone else ran away, who carried people to safety, who worked 12-hour shifts that required both mental sharpness and physical strength. The car accident had changed everything. A drunk driver had run a red light on a rainy Tuesday night, and David's ambulance had taken the full impact on the passenger side. His partner walked away with minor cuts, but David spent 4 months in the hospital. Surgeries had saved his life but left him with a roadmap of scars across his chest, arms, and back. Months of bed rest had melted away muscle he had spent years building. Even now, getting dressed each morning was a reminder of how much his body had changed. The scars weren't just marks on his skin. They were proof of the weakest moment of his life, when he couldn't help anyone, not even himself. That's why he chose clothes that hid everything, why he avoided situations where people might see the evidence of his vulnerability. But the gym was different. Here he could work on becoming strong again, even if nobody understood why it mattered so much to him. David had developed his own quiet system. He watched other people carefully, learning proper form by observation. When the gym was less crowded, usually around lunchtime on weekends, he practiced movements he had seen others do. He took notes on his phone about which exercises worked which muscles. He researched everything online. Turning his analytical programmer mind toward understanding his own body, the other gym members had started to notice him, not always in the way he hoped. There was Tom, a friendly guy in his 40s who sometimes nodded hello. Tom seemed to appreciate David's consistency, even if he didn't understand why someone so thin was always there. Then there was Rachel, a college student who used the gym to take breaks from studying. She had asked David about his workout routine once, seemed genuinely impressed that he came every day, but Lisa's attitude hadn't changed at all. If anything, she seemed more annoyed by his presence as the weeks went on. David overheard her talking to other trainers about gym tourists who took up space without making real progress. She never mentioned him by name, but her eyes always seemed to find him when she said things like that. What bothered David most wasn't the judgment about his appearance. He had gotten used to being underestimated. What hurt was that Lisa saw his efforts as wasted time, as if trying to improve wasn't worthwhile unless the results were immediately visible. She had no idea that every day he showed up was a victory over the voice in his head that told him he would never be strong again. The real test came on a Thursday evening when David was attempting to increase his weights on the chest press machine. He had been using the same light setting for 2 weeks, and he felt ready to challenge himself. The jump seemed small, just 10 more pounds, but when he tried to push the handles forward, his left arm gave out unexpectedly. The weights came down. With a loud clang that echoed through the gym, several people turned to look, and David felt his face burning with embarrassment. His left shoulder, which had been rebuilt with pins and screws after the accident, sometimes reminded him that it wasn't quite the same as it used to be. Lisa appeared beside the machine almost immediately. "Are you hurt?" she asked, but her tone suggested she was more concerned about liability than his well-being. "I'm fine," David said quickly, trying to stand up from the machine. "Just pushed a little too hard." "Maybe you should stick with lighter weights," Lisa said, not unkindly, but with the kind of professional distance that made it clear she thought he was in over his head. "It's better to be safe than sorry." David nodded and moved away from the machine, but her words stung more than his shoulder did. She was probably right about being careful, but she said it like he was a child who had touched a hot stove, like he didn't understand his own limitations. What Lisa didn't know was that David understood his limitations better than anyone. Every morning when he got dressed, he saw exactly what his body could and couldn't do. Every time he reached for something on a high shelf and felt the tight pull of scar tissue, he was reminded of how much he had lost. But he also knew something that Lisa didn't see. He knew what it felt like to rebuild yourself from almost nothing. That night, David stayed later than usual. The gym was nearly empty, just him and a few dedicated evening exercisers. He went back to the chest press machine, reset it to his usual weight, and completed his sets slowly and carefully. Each repetition was deliberate, controlled. He wasn't trying to impress anyone or prove a point. He was just continuing the long process of becoming strong again. As he finished his workout, David caught his reflection in one of the mirrors that lined the walls. He still looked thin and unremarkable in his loose clothes. But something in his posture was different now, straighter, more confident. The person looking back at him was someone who showed up every day, who didn't quit when things got difficult, who understood that real strength was built one day at a time. Tom passed by on his way to the locker room and gave David a thumbs up. "Looking good, man. I see you in here every day. That's what it takes." David smiled and nodded his thanks. Tom didn't know about the scars or the accident or the months of physical therapy. He just saw someone who was committed to improving, and that was enough. Walking to his car that night, David realized that Lisa's opinion was becoming less important to him. She saw weakness where he saw progress. She saw someone who didn't belong where he saw someone who was exactly where he needed to be. The gap between her perception and his reality was wide. It was starting to feel like her problem, not his. Tomorrow would be Friday. David would be back at 6 o'clock sharp. Not because he had anything to prove to Lisa or anyone else, but because he had made a promise to himself. Every day was another step toward becoming the person he used to be, or maybe someone even better. 6 weeks into his gym routine, David had settled into a comfortable pattern. He knew which machines were usually free at certain times, which water fountain had the coldest water, and exactly how long it took him to complete his circuit. The gym had become familiar territory even if he still felt like an outsider looking in. That Tuesday evening started like any other. David was halfway through his workout, using the leg press machine, when he heard a commotion near the cardio section. Someone was calling for help, and the voice sounded panicked. David looked up to see a crowd gathering around one of the exercise bikes. An older man, probably in his 60s, was slumped forward, his face pale and sweaty. People were standing around looking worried, but nobody seemed to know what to do. Some were pulling out their phones, probably to call for help, without thinking. David abandoned his machine and walked quickly toward the scene. His old training kicked in automatically, like muscle memory that had been sleeping for 3 years. As he got closer, he could see the man was conscious, but struggling to breathe. His lips had a slightly blue tint, and he was gripping his chest. "Give me some space, please," David said calmly, kneeling beside the exercise bike. The crowd stepped back without question. There was something in his voice that commanded attention, a confidence that hadn't been there when he was struggling with push dash-ups. David placed his hand on the man's shoulder. "Hey there, I'm David. What's your name?" Frank, the man managed to say between labored breaths. "My chest, ... it feels tight." "Okay, Frank, I'm going to help you." David's voice was steady and reassuring. "First, let's get you sitting up straight. That's it. Now I want you to try to slow your breathing down, in through your nose, out through your mouth." David quickly assessed Frank's condition. His pulse was rapid but not irregular. His skin was clammy, but he was alert and responsive. It could be a heart attack, but it might also be anxiety or overexertion. Either way, Frank needed medical attention. Has someone called emergency services? David asked the crowd without taking his eyes off Frank. "I did," said Rachel, the college student David had spoken to before. "They're on their way." David nodded and turned back to Frank. "Help is coming, Frank. You're doing great. Can you tell me if you have any medical conditions? Any medications?" As Frank answered David's questions, something interesting was happening in the crowd around them. People were whispering among themselves, but not in the way they usually did. When David was around, they were asking each other who he was and how he knew what to do. Someone mentioned that he seemed to really know about medical stuff. Lisa had appeared at the edge of the crowd. She was holding a first aid kit from the front desk, but she seemed unsure about what to do with it. Her usual confidence was nowhere to be seen as she watched David work. "Frank, I'm going to loosen your shirt a little bit, okay? It'll help you breathe easier." David's movements were gentle but sure. He had done this hundreds of times before in ambulances and emergency rooms and accident scenes. His hands knew what to do even when his mind was focused on keeping Frank calm. "You seem to know what you're doing," Frank said, his breathing starting to slow down a little. "I used to work in emergency medical services," David said simply. It was the first time he had mentioned his past to anyone at the gym. "Just try to stay calm. The paramedics will be here soon." The crowd around them had grown larger, but it was quieter now. People were watching David with new respect. This wasn't the same guy who struggled to complete a set of push-ups. This was someone who knew how to handle a crisis, who could take charge when others felt helpless. When the paramedics arrived 5 minutes later, David gave them a clear professional report. He told them Frank's symptoms, his vital signs, and what had happened. The paramedics nodded and asked a few follow-up questions, clearly recognizing that David knew what he was talking about. "Are you medical?" one of the paramedics asked David. "Former paramedic," David replied. "Been out of the field for a while?" "Yes." The paramedics loaded Frank onto a stretcher. The older man reached out and grabbed David's hand. "Thank you," he said. "You kept me calm when I thought I was dying." David squeezed Frank's hand gently. You're going to be fine. The hospital will take good care of you. After the ambulance left, the gym slowly returned to normal, but people kept looking at David differently. Tom came over and patted him on the back. That was incredible, man. Where'd you learn to do that? Long story, David said, feeling suddenly self-conscious. The adrenaline was wearing off, and he was becoming aware of all the eyes still on him. Rachel approached him as he was gathering his things. That was amazing, David. I had no idea you were a paramedic. Former paramedic, David corrected. I don't do that anymore. Why not? Rachel asked. You're obviously really good at it. How could he explain that every time he thought about going back to emergency medicine, he remembered lying in a hospital bed, unable to help himself, let alone anyone else? How could he tell her that putting on a paramedic uniform again felt like pretending to be someone he used to be? It's complicated, he said finally. Lisa had been standing nearby, clearly listening to the conversation. For the first time since David had been coming to the gym, she approached him directly. That was really impressive, she said, and her voice was different. Not condescending or dismissive, but genuinely respectful. I've been working here for 3 years, and I've never seen anyone handle an emergency like that. David looked at her, surprised by the change in her tone. Thanks. I'm just glad Frank is okay. Can I ask why you stopped being a paramedic? Lisa's question was gentle, not pushy. David considered his answer carefully. He could give her the simple version, the one that didn't include months of surgeries and rehabilitation, but something about the way she was looking at him, with genuine curiosity instead of judgment, made him want to be honest. I was in an accident a few years ago, he said. Spent a long time recovering. When I was finally better, I didn't feel ready to go back to that kind of work. Lisa nodded slowly. That must have been really hard. It was. David picked up his gym bag. But I'm working on getting stronger again. As David walked toward the locker room, he could feel that something had shifted. The other gym members were still looking at him, but not with pity or amusement. They were looking at him with respect. He had shown them something about himself that changed their entire perception of who he was. In the locker room, David sat on the bench and thought about what had just happened. For 10 minutes, he had been the person he used to be. Confident, capable, in control. It felt good, but it also reminded him of everything he had lost. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Frank's daughter. Dad asked me to get your number from the gym. You wanted me to tell you that the doctor said you probably saved his life by keeping him calm. Thank you. David stared at the message for a long time. Maybe Lisa was right. Maybe he was stronger than he thought. Maybe the person he used to be wasn't as far away as he believed. Walking out of the gym that night, David felt different again, not just because people were treating him differently, but because he was starting to see himself differently too. The scars under his loose clothes were still there, but they were starting to feel less like evidence of weakness and more like proof that he had survived something difficult. Tomorrow he would be back at 6 o'clock, just like always. But now, he had a feeling that people would be watching him with new eyes, wondering what other surprises the quiet guy in baggy clothes might have. 2 days after the incident with Frank, David walked into the gym to find something unexpected. The atmosphere had changed completely. People who had never spoken to him before were nodding hello. Rachel waved from across the room, even some of the serious weightlifters, who usually kept to themselves, gave him respectful nods. But the biggest change was in Lisa. She was waiting for him near the front desk. And for the first time since he'd been coming to the gym, she approached him with what looked like genuine interest. David, do you have a minute? She asked. Her voice was different now, warmer and more respectful than he'd ever heard it. Sure, David said, setting down his gym bag. I wanted to apologize, Lisa said, looking him directly in the eyes. I've been treating you badly since you started. Coming here, and after what happened with Frank, I realized I was completely wrong about you. David felt surprised by her honesty. You don't need to apologize. Yes, I do. Lisa looked uncomfortable, but determined to continue. I judged you based on how you looked, and I was wrong. Really wrong. I've been a trainer for 5 years, and I've never seen anyone handle an emergency like you did. You probably saved that man's life. David shifted uncomfortably. He wasn't used to this kind of attention or praise. I just did what anyone would do. No, you didn't, Lisa said firmly. Most people would have panicked or just called for help and waited. You knew exactly what to do. You kept Frank calm and gave the paramedics all the information they needed. That's not something just anyone can do. She paused, then asked the question David had been dreading. Can I ask what happened? Why did you stop being a paramedic? David looked around the gym. It was still early, not too crowded, but he could see a few people glancing their way. He wasn't ready to have this conversation in public. It's kind of a long story, he said. I have time, Lisa replied. And I promise, anything you tell me stays between us. David considered this. For 3 years, he had kept his story to himself. His family knew, of course, and his doctors, but he had never talked about it with anyone who didn't already know. There was something about Lisa's genuine interest, though, that made him want to share. There was an accident, David began slowly. 3 years ago, I was working a night shift and we got a call about a car accident. Drunk driver ran a red light and hit us while we were responding to another emergency. Lisa's expression became serious. That's terrible. Were you hurt badly? David nodded. 4 months in the hospital. Multiple surgeries. My partner walked away with just cuts and bruises, but he trailed off. Not sure how to explain the extent of his injuries without going into details that might make her uncomfortable. I'm so sorry, Lisa said softly. That must have been incredibly difficult. The physical recovery was hard, David continued, but the mental part was worse. I went from being someone who helped people in emergencies to being someone who needed help with everything, couldn't even lift a glass of water for weeks. David felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came whenever he talked about this period of his life. When I finally got better, I tried to go back to work, but I just couldn't. Every time I got in an ambulance, I remembered being the patient instead of the paramedic. I couldn't focus on helping other people when I was so aware of how quickly everything could go wrong. Lisa was quiet for a moment, processing what he had told her. Is that why you started coming to the gym? To get strong again? Partly, David said. My doctor said I needed to exercise more, but really I wanted to feel capable again. I wanted to stop being afraid of my own body. But you're not afraid, Lisa said. You proved that with Frank. You didn't hesitate at all. David thought about this. She was right. When Frank needed help, he hadn't thought about his own limitations or fears. He just acted on instinct and training. I guess helping someone else is different from helping myself, he said. Lisa looked at him with new understanding. You know, I see a lot of people come through here with different goals. Some want to look better, some want to feel better, some just want to be healthier. But I've never met anyone who is rebuilding themselves after something like what you went through. I'm not sure I'm rebuilding, David said. Maybe I'm just trying to become someone new. Can I ask you something? Lisa said. And please don't take this the wrong way, but why do you always wear such loose clothes? I mean, I understand wanting to be comfortable, but David felt his face getting warm. This was the question he had been hoping to avoid. It's complicated. Lisa seemed to realize she had touched on something sensitive. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. No, it's okay, David said. It's just... The accident left me with some scars. A lot of scars, actually. I prefer to keep them covered. I understand, Lisa said quietly. But David, you know that scars don't make you weak, right? They're proof that you survived something that could have killed you. David had heard similar words from his therapist, but somehow hearing them from Lisa felt different. Coming from someone who had initially judged him as weak, it carried more weight. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the main entrance. The gym manager was arguing with someone about a membership issue, and the situation was getting heated. Their members were starting to gather around, and David could see that the argument was escalating. I should probably go handle that, Lisa said, but she seemed reluctant to end their conversation. Go ahead, David said. Thanks for talking with me. As Lisa walked away to deal with the situation at the front desk, David thought about what she had said. Maybe she was right. Maybe his scars weren't something to hide. They were part of his story, part of what made him who he was. David started his usual workout routine, but his mind kept wandering back to their conversation. First time in 3 years, someone had looked at his situation and seen strength instead of weakness. Lisa had gone from dismissing him as a hopeless case to seeing him as someone who had overcome something difficult. About halfway through his workout, David noticed that the gym had gotten busier. The evening rush was starting, and more people were arriving. He was using the shoulder press machine when he heard a familiar voice behind him. "Excuse me, are you David?" He turned to see Frank, the man from the emergency 2 days ago. Frank looked much better now, with good color in his face and a steady gait. Was accompanied by a woman who looked like she might be his daughter. "Frank," David said, genuinely pleased to see him looking well. "How are you feeling?" "It's much better." "Thanks to you," Frank said, extending his hand for a shake. "This is my daughter, Amy. She's the one who texted you." Amy smiled warmly. "Dad insisted on coming here to thank you in person. The doctor said your quick thinking probably prevented a much more serious episode." David felt embarrassed by the praise. "I'm just glad you're okay, Frank." "The doctor said I had a panic attack brought on by overexertion," Frank explained. "But if you hadn't been there to keep me calm and breathing properly, it could have turned into something much worse." As they talked, David became aware that their conversation was drawing attention from other gym members. People were stopping their workouts to listen, and he could see Lisa watching from across the room with a smile on her face. Frank and Amy stayed for a few more minutes, with Frank insisting on giving David his contact information. "If you ever need anything at all, you call me," Frank said. "I mean it." After they left, David felt a warmth in his chest that he hadn't experienced in years. He had helped someone. He had made a real difference in someone's life. For the first time since his accident, he felt like the person he used to be and the person he was becoming might not be so different after all. As David finished his workout and headed toward the locker room, he caught Lisa's eye across the gym. She gave him a thumbs up and a smile that was completely different from any expression he had seen from her before. It was a smile of respect, of understanding, and maybe even of friendship. Walking out of the gym that evening, David realized that something fundamental had changed. It's not just in how other people saw him, but in how he saw himself. The scars under his loose clothes were still there, but they felt less like a burden and more like a part of his story. A story that wasn't over yet. 2 months had passed since David's conversation with Lisa, and the gym had become a completely different place for him. What started as a lonely struggle to regain his strength had transformed into something he never expected. He had found a community. Lisa had kept her word about everything staying private. But word had spread naturally about David's medical background. Not through gossip, but through genuine respect. When new members had questions about proper form or safety, people would sometimes suggest talking to David. When someone felt dizzy or overexerted, they looked for him first. David found himself becoming an unofficial safety coordinator, and surprisingly, he enjoyed it. Helping people felt natural, like putting on a comfortable old jacket that still fit perfectly. It reminded him why he had loved being a paramedic in the first place. That Thursday evening started like any other. David was finishing his workout when Lisa approached him with an unusual request. "David, can I ask you for a favor?" she said, looking slightly nervous. "Sure, what's up?" "The gym is hosting a first aid training session next week for all the staff and interested members. Our usual instructor canceled at the last minute, and I was wondering..." She paused, then continued in a rush. "Would you consider teaching? I know it's asking a lot, but you're the most qualified person I know." David felt his stomach drop. Teaching a class meant being the center of attention, answering questions, demonstrating techniques. It meant admitting publicly that he was qualified to teach medical skills, which felt like claiming to be someone he wasn't sure he still was. "I don't know, Lisa. I've been out of the field for 3 years. Certification probably isn't even current anymore." "I already checked," Lisa said quickly. "Your paramedic certification is still valid for another year. And David, you saved Frank's life. You know this stuff better than any instructor we could hire." David looked around the gym. Several people were finishing their workouts. People who had come to trust him and respect his knowledge. The idea of disappointing them felt worse than the fear of stepping back into a teaching role. "Can I think about it?" he asked. "Of course. But David, I really think you should do it. You're already helping people here every day. This would just make it official." That night, David couldn't stop thinking about Lisa's request. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, remembering the last time he had taught a first aid class. It was 2 weeks before his accident, to a group of new paramedic recruits. He had been confident then, sure of his knowledge and abilities. The accident had shaken that confidence so badly that he wasn't sure it would ever fully return. But then, he thought about Frank, about the calm way he had handled that emergency, about how natural it had felt to help. Maybe Lisa was right. Maybe he was more ready than he thought. The next morning, David called Lisa. "I'll do it," he said. "But I want to practice first. Can we run through everything before the actual class?" "Absolutely," Lisa said, and David could hear the smile in her voice. "Thank you, David. This means a lot." The training session was scheduled for the following Saturday morning. David spent the week preparing, reviewing protocols he hadn't taught in years, practicing demonstrations in front of his bathroom mirror. It felt strange to be stepping back into the role of instructor, but also strangely familiar. Saturday morning arrived with David feeling more nervous than he had in months. He had barely slept, and his hands were shaking slightly as he set up the training area. Lisa had arranged chairs in a semicircle. She had borrowed a CPR dummy from the local hospital. 20 people showed up for the session, including several gym staff members, regular members like Tom and Rachel, and some people David had never seen before. As they took their seats, David felt the familiar pre-presentation anxiety he remembered from his teaching days. "Good morning, everyone," David began, his voice slightly hoarse from nerves. "I'm David, and I'll be leading today's first aid training." He paused, looking out at the expectant faces. These weren't paramedic recruits or medical students. These were regular people who wanted to learn how to help in an emergency. People like he had been before his accident. People who might one day face a situation where someone's life depended on their actions. "Before we start," David continued, his voice growing stronger, "I want you to know that the goal today isn't to make you medical experts. It's to give you the confidence to act when someone needs help, and the knowledge to do it safely." As David began the session, something amazing happened. His nervousness disappeared. The familiar rhythm of teaching took over, and he found himself moving naturally between demonstration and explanation. Between technical knowledge and practical application, he taught them how to check for responsiveness, how to call for help effectively, how to perform CPR with proper hand placement and compression depth. He showed them how to help someone who was choking, how to recognize the signs of a heart attack, how to assist someone having a panic attack. But most importantly, he taught them how to stay calm under pressure. "The most important thing you can do in an emergency," David explained during a break, "is to remain calm. Panic is contagious, but so is confidence. When you stay calm, you help the person you're helping stay calm too." Rachel raised her hand. "How do you stay calm when someone might be dying?" David thought about Frank, about the way his training had kicked in automatically, despite his fears. "You focus on what you can control," he said. "You can't control what happened to the person, but you can control how you respond. You can control whether you make the situation better or worse." As the session continued, David noticed something happening in the room. People were becoming more confident, more engaged. They were asking good questions and practicing with genuine enthusiasm. Tom was helping other participants with their CPR technique. Rachel was taking detailed notes. Even Lisa, who had probably seen dozens of first aid presentations, was fully engaged. Near the end of the session, David demonstrated how to properly assist someone having a breathing emergency, using the same techniques he had used with Frank. As he explained the importance of keeping the person calm and monitoring their vital signs, he realized that he was teaching from experience, not just from textbook knowledge. "Does anyone have questions about anything we've covered?" David asked as the session wound down. An older woman in the back raised her hand. "You seem to really know this stuff. How long have you been teaching first aid?" David hesitated for a moment. The old David might have downplayed his experience, or deflected the question. But the person he was becoming felt ready to be honest. "I used to be a paramedic," he said simply. "I taught classes like this regularly before I left the field." Why did you leave? Someone asked. David looked around the room at these people who had trusted him to teach them something important. They deserved an honest answer. I was in an accident a few years ago, he said. It took me a long time to recover, and I lost confidence in my abilities. But being here, working with all of you, has helped me remember why I love doing this work in the first place. The room was quiet. For a moment, then Tom started clapping. Soon, everyone was applauding, not just for the session, but for David's honesty and courage. As people gathered their things and headed out, many of them stopped to thank David personally. Frank, who had attended the session, gave him a hearty handshake. You're a natural teacher, he said. I hope you'll do more of these. Lisa was the last to leave. That was incredible, David. You were born to do this. Have you ever thought about going back to medical work? David considered her question. A few months ago, the idea would have seemed impossible. Standing in that room, having just successfully taught a group of people skills that could save lives, it didn't seem so far-fetched anymore. Maybe, he said, maybe I'm not as far from that person as I thought. As David packed up the training materials, he caught his reflection in one of the gym mirrors. For the first time in 3 years, he saw someone who looked confident and capable. Someone who had something valuable to offer the world. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Hi, this is Beth from today's first aid class. I'm a coordinator at the community center. Would you be interested in teaching regular classes for us? We really need someone with your experience and teaching ability. David stared at the message for a long moment. It was an opportunity to step back into the world he had left behind, to be useful again in the way he had always wanted to be. He typed back, I'd love to discuss it. When can we talk? Walking out of the gym that day, David felt like he was walking into a new chapter of his life. The scars under his clothes were still there, but they no longer felt like marks of weakness. They were proof that he had survived, that he had overcome something difficult, and that he was ready to help others do the same. Lisa was right. He was stronger than he had thought, not just physically, but in every way that mattered. The first time since his accident, David felt truly excited about what came next.